first round of stimulus checks should be out, and most of you should have received your money. However, I do know that like up to 80 million people have not received their check so far. And the funny thing is that with this first round not even fully implemented, the government is already talking about a second round of stimulus payments. Because let's be real, a $1,200 check is not going to cut it for most Americans. Giving more money can increase consumer spending on things such as food, necessities, rent, and so on. It can be a good way to inject money into the economy. So you may have heard this already, but 2 new bills have been proposed by Congress and are on the table for negotiations right now. This doesn't mean that another stimulus bill will necessarily pass, but I do certainly think that something is coming at least. One is a $2,000 a month payment to eligible Americans called the Emergency Money for the People's Act. This would provide monthly cash payments to eligible Americans and continue on until employment reaches pre-coronavirus levels or a minimum of 6 months. This is certainly enticing, but it definitely draws lots of debate over whether this is the best way to spend the money. The second proposal, which is actually even more debated and is what I'll be focusing on in this video, is to provide free rent and no mortgage payments for the duration of the coronavirus pandemic. This legislation is called the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act, proposed by Representative Ilhan Omar. More specifically, this bill would cancel all residential mortgages and rental payments across the US. Commercial and industrial properties would not be covered, but those would likely be covered by any additional funding for PPP loans. So pretty much this is how it works. This bill would apply to all current primary residences, including subleases and room rentals. And it also applies to all rental agreements and mortgage agreements. So whether you're renting a house or a room, or you have your own house, you would qualify for this. As far as income requirements, there are none. And it literally does not matter how much your rental or mortgage payments are per month. It can be as low as $1 to no maximum amount. Based on the current proposal, the timeline would be like this. It would be retroactive from March 13th, 2020 for up to 1 year. So pretty much you would get reimbursed for whatever you paid for that half of March, as well as your payment for April. There are lots of protections based on this proposed bill. For example, there would be no negative impact on your credit score if you otherwise would not have been able to pay your rent or mortgage. And this is simply because you just won't have a mortgage or rental payment for the next year. As a result, you can pay off a lot of your other debts, and this would help out a lot of Americans. You literally would not have to pay for housing, which is the biggest expense for 99.9% of Americans, except for this guy. Now, what happens if you have a mortgage for a place but also rent where you live? This means that you can receive 100% relief for one or the other. You can't get relief for both, and it only applies to the one that you actually choose. Nationwide, it seems like about 65% of people own their own homes and don't rent, which means that 35% of people rent their residence from a landlord. I couldn't find the information for 2020 or 2019, but in 2015, there were 48.5 million rental units. Now, if renters are off the hook for their rental payments, what's going to happen to these landlords? Well, with this proposal, the federal government, under the Department of Housing and Urban Development, would create a sort of relief fund for landlords. Essentially, they would be reimbursed for any lost rent. The same applies for lenders who are also going to be very impacted by this coronavirus pandemic. Since if landlords don't get their rent money and people don't make their mortgage payments, of course that means the lender's not going to get their money as well. Landlords who do get funds from this program will have to abide by fair renting rules for 5 years. For example, they would not be able to discriminate on who lives in their rental unit. They also cannot just evict people because they want to, and they cannot collect back rent after this moratorium is lifted, and they cannot increase the rental rate. In addition, an affordable housing acquisition fund would be established. This fund would be used to actually purchase private rental properties on behalf of low-income housing providers. So now, what are the pros and cons of this proposed stimulus bill? Well, let's first talk about the most obvious pro, which is that people won't miss their housing payments anymore. Since housing is most people's biggest expense and tons of people have been getting laid off, this would save a lot of headache for people who just can't afford to pay their rent or mortgage anymore. I mean, with no money coming in, it's just literally impossible for some people to continue up with these payments. By paying for people's rents, this is a way of injecting money into the economy. It means that people will have more money to spend on other things and boost other businesses who rely on these people to spend money at their stores. Now let's get into one of the big cons about this proposed bill. The fact that there's no income limit, no eligibility rules, and also no cap on the amount of rent or mortgage that is covered means that this bill would help the rich a lot more than the poor. The rich have bigger housing payments compared to the poor, and most of them have enough money to actually withstand this pandemic. Another pro is that since most Americans spend the majority of their money on rent or housing, this is a good way to actually just force them to spend this money on rent. That way they don't blow their money on other things. This is also important because I see missed rent payments and mortgage payments as one of the biggest implications, besides of course health, for this coronavirus pandemic. In fact, a third of Americans didn't pay their April rent. That just shows how big this issue is, and it shows that yes, having free rent or mortgage for 12 months would help a lot of people. Okay, back to a con of this bill. Well, it seems like a lazy bill to me. Since everyone qualifies, it seems like a lot of people who don't need the help will get help. Also, based on what I'm reading, it seems like people who have already paid off their home, who don't have a mortgage, wouldn't get any money. And of course, that's unfair to a lot of people. Also, it's like, do they cover the whole mortgage? Do they cover just the interest or interest and principal? Being in the mortgage industry, there are so many different types of mortgages. Some that pay way more money towards interest, some that pay way more money towards principal. It also depends on how far into your loan term you are, because at the start of the loan term, you're paying more interest than principal. But if you're towards the end of your mortgage, that means you're gonna be paying more towards your principal and not interest. There's also like 15-year terms and 30-year terms. So in my opinion, as a mortgage professional, there are just too many variables that make this not fair across the board. Another pro though is that it is cheaper than the $2,000 a month proposal. The median mortgage for US homeowners is about $1,100 per month. And now the median rental as of 2020 is $1,468 per month. You can take a look at this chart, which shows you the highest and lowest rents for one bedrooms across the US. You can see that they range from about $500 to $600 all the way to the high 3,000s. However, looking at the median of about $1,100, you can see that this is significantly less than $2,000. And keep in mind that the $2,000 is per person. So if you have a one bedroom and you have two people living there, the cost of this free rent and mortgage program would be between $1,000 and $2,000 most likely, versus $4,000 based on the other proposal. Another con is that they're gonna need a huge team of people, of support personnel, to ensure that this runs smoothly. I mean, we've seen that they can't even send out a single $1,200 check reliably. So yeah, how are they going to be able to enforce this? Have enough manpower to actually talk to the millions and millions of Americans who all are going to have some unique situation and need some type of support. It just is not feasible in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying that this free rent proposal is completely insane or is not worth talking about, but I think that the way that this bill is written, it's just not fair across the board, and it's helping out a lot of people who don't need help and neglecting a lot of people who need the help the most. The thought of the federal government paying the rent or mortgage of a person who makes like $5 million per year sort of makes me sick. We definitely need to reroute these funds to poor Americans, or at least have some type of cap on the amount that is covered. So yeah, these are just my thoughts. I do think that this bill is really cool and it's very significant in that it puts this free rent, free mortgage situation on the table for Congress to think about. It very well might make its way into the final stimulus bill, at least in some way, shape, or form. Yes, it would be amazing to not have to pay my rent or pay my mortgage, but let's face it, from a real estate perspective, this just does not seem like the best plan. It's also going to be very, very hard to implement and actually enforce rules, and it's going to be unfair to a lot of people and way too generous for another group of people. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys liked the video, make sure to hit that like button and also subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. There's going to be tons of updates to stimulus bill proposals and actual negotiations in the next few weeks, so I will be making new update videos as they come along. It's going to be exciting to see where Congress takes these proposals. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.